Usually when we talk about political change, there's this expectation of precision, like it's engineering or something.
Right, yeah, like it's a math equation.
Exactly. You have an oppressive regime, you apply enough pressure, the regime falls, and boom, you just point to a new democratic dawn and say, there it is.
Which is, never how it actually works.
No, not at all. You expect a clean X-ray showing exactly where the bone is broken and exactly how to set it. But then you step into the world of actual geopolitical transitions and factional infighting and multi-generational national trauma.
Yeah, and suddenly that X-ray machine is just completely broken.
Right. It's just a murky, fractured landscape. And that's exactly what we're looking at today. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way. Our mission today is to unpack a really dense, highly political, and honestly deeply psychological audio interview from Radio Irava.
Yeah, it features a psychologist named Iraj Abedini.
Right. And the entire conversation is set against the backdrop of the Iranian New Year, Nowruz, in the year 1405 on the Persian calendar, which, for you listening, places us roughly in March of 2026.
It is just a phenomenal piece of audio to analyze.
Yeah.
I mean, it pulls together threads you would normally expect to see woven into the same argument.
Oh, absolutely.
You've got, Albanian geopolitics sitting right next to classified CIA assessments from the 1980s.
Yeah.
And all of it is filtered through the lens of cognitive psychology.
It's wild. We're going to examine how this source connects those foreign policy shifts to the trauma of an entire nation, culminating in this really vivid image of a prison cell celebration fueled by a single sugar cube.
It's a powerful metaphor.
It really is.
Yeah.
But before we get into the mechanics of this text, we need to set some absolute ground rules for you, the listener.
Yes, very important.
To be crystal clear here, the material we are diving into today contains strong, highly polarized political viewpoints regarding the Iranian government and various opposition factions.
Mm-hmm.
We aren't taking sides, we aren't endorsing any faction, and we aren't independently verifying these claims. Our job is simply to unpack what the source material is arguing and explain the underlying logic of those arguments so you can understand the complexities of this specific perspective.
Exactly. Acting as impartial guides through this material means looking at how the speaker builds his case. And Abedini builds his case, starting with a seemingly random geopolitical event that serves as the catalyst for the whole interview.
Right, the Albanian connection.
Yeah. He begins by analyzing Albania, officially designating the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, as a terrorist organization.
Which, okay, let's look at the mechanics of that. Why does a Persian language political interview focused on the internal future of Iran kick off by analyzing the foreign policy of a Balkan nation?
I mean, it seems totally disconnected until you look at the ripple effects.
Right.
The source highlights that this designation is far more than just, a symbolic diplomatic gesture. Albania is a NATO member.
Which is...
Exactly. By applying the terrorist label to the IRGC, Albania is structurally aligning its foreign policy and its security apparatus directly with the United States and broader Western intelligence.
Yeah, but the local on-the-ground context is what makes this an absolute powder keg, right? Because Albania currently hosts thousands of members of the MEK.
The Mojahedin cult.
Yeah, a major Iranian opposition group at this sprawling compound known as Ashraf 3.
Yeah. So you have a massive organized opposition presence sitting right inside a NATO country.
Oh, wow.
And according to the interview, that presence has made Tirana the target of severe state-sponsored cyber attacks originating from Iran.
Right, and those attacks were crippling enough that they previously led the Albanian government to sever diplomatic ties completely.
Exactly. So Abedini argues that slapping the official terrorist label on the IRGC fundamentally changes the rules of engagement here.
How so?
Well, it gives Albania the legal and structural cover to aggressively counter those Iranian cyber warfare campaigns and any physical threats against the Ashraf 3 base, not just as a diplomatic dispute, but as a full-fledged anti-terrorism operation.
Oh, I see.
Furthermore, the source claims this move is designed to send a stark warning to other Balkan nations. It's essentially telling neighboring countries that might still maintain, back-channel ties or economic appeasement policies toward Iran that the geopolitical grace period is over.
Okay, so that sets up a picture of intense external pressure on the Iranian establishment.
Right.
But the source takes it a step further, and this is where I have to point out a fascinating tension in Abedini's logic, because the interview doesn't just stick to cyber attacks and diplomatic maneuvering.
No, it gets much more kinetic.
Yeah. The interviewer and Abedini explicitly discuss literal bombs dropping. They reference U.S. and Israeli military strikes hitting Iranian leaders and critical infrastructure.
Specifically pointing to strategic assets like the South Pars gas fields.
Right, so Abedini has to reconcile two conflicting ideas here. On one hand, he is actively cheering for the elimination of regime leaders. But at the same time, his country's vital infrastructure is getting obliterated by foreign military powers. How does he square that circle?
Well, he navigates that cognitive dissonance by drawing a very rigid, almost grim line in the sand.
Okay.
Abedini expresses satisfaction that these leaders, whom he categorically labels as criminals, are facing lethal consequences.
Right, though he adds a caveat, right.
Yeah. He notes his personal wish would have been to see them stand trial in a competent international court of law rather than being assassinated.
Right.
But when it comes to the infrastructure strikes, he pivots to a fierce warning. He explicitly cautions the Iranian populace against falling into the trap of supporting foreign military intervention as a tool for liberation.
Because he fundamentally distrusts the motives of those foreign powers. Like, he doesn't believe they are dropping bombs to pave the way for a flourishing Iranian democracy. It's not. His argument in the text is that the primary goal of these foreign powers is the deliberate destruction of Iran's national infrastructure, like those massive gas fields you mentioned, to essentially eliminate a geopolitical rival. The objective, he claims, is to turn Iran into a weakened, perpetually dependent nation.
So what's his solution then?
He advocates for what he calls a third way. This perspective emphasizes that the Iranian people must be the ones to dismantle the current regime, rejecting both the existing establishment and the illusion of foreign military saviors.
Okay, so if Abedini is fiercely warning people not to rely on those foreign bombs to save them, he logically has to present a domestic alternative.
Yeah, you have to have a plan.
Right. You can't tell a populace to reject outside help unless you can point to a functioning system already built inside the country. It's like telling someone to knock out a load-bearing pillar in a condemned building.
Oh, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, if you don't have heavy-duty scaffolding already in place to hold the roof up, the whole thing just collapses on top of you. So what is the scaffolding he's proposing?
The scaffolding Abedini champions in this text is the National Council of Resistance of Iran, the NCRI.
Okay.
And more specifically, the operational wing known as the National Liberation Army, or NLA, operating inside the country.
And the history the source provides for this group is really vital to understanding their current claims, isn't it?
Absolutely. The text notes the NLA was originally formed as a conventional armed force in Iraq back in 1987 or 1366 on the Persian calendar.
Right, and that was after the opposition movement faced heavy political restrictions in France.
Exactly. So operating out of Iraq during and after the Iran-Iraq War gave the NLA a highly formalized military structure.
But there's a massive shift later on.
Yeah, the critical turning point the interview focuses on is the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003.
Right.
During that conflict, the NLA was effectively disarmed by U.S. forces. They had to hand over their tanks, their artillery, their physical weapons.
But the central foundational claim Abedini makes here is that while the hardware was surrendered, the invisible architecture survived.
Yes.
The command structure, the strict organizational hierarchy, the internal discipline, all of that remained entirely intact.
And according to the interview, that surviving architecture didn't just fade away, it morphed.
Into what?
It evolved into what they now call rebel units, or Kanun-Hayi Shureshi, operating deep underground inside Iran today.
Wow.
And the source is very careful to distinguish these units from random, angry citizens protesting in the streets.
Right, they aren't just a grassroots flash mob.
Exactly. They're described as highly organized, compartmentalized intelligence and action cells. The text specifically credits them with executing complex, coordinated attacks on extremely high-value targets.
Like the office of the Supreme Leader, Khamenei, right?
Yeah, and various Basij paramilitary command centers. Abedini leans heavily on that operational discipline. He argues that in a time of catastrophic chaos, when foreign powers are striking from the air and the central government's control is fracturing, the only thing standing between the nation and total bloody anarchy is a disciplined, pre-existing alternative.
So they are claiming they are ready to step in.
Yeah, the source claims this NCRI coalition doesn't just offer resistance, they offer a structured, ready-to-execute 6-month transitional government plan.
A 6-month transitional plan. That timeline is incredibly specific, and the mechanics of it are fascinating.
Yeah, it's very detailed.
Because a 6-month window isn't meant to establish a permanent government, It's designed strictly as a bridge.
Right.
According to their outlined plan, this period is purely dedicated to maintaining basic civil order and setting up a constituent assembly.
And that assembly's sole job would be to draft a new constitution and facilitate national elections, handing power back to the populace.
But there is one immediate, non-negotiable tenet of this transitional plan that Abedini highlights, which is an absolute day-one ban on all executions.
Yeah, and he frames that ban not just as like a human rights policy, but as a necessary psychological shock to the system.
How do you mean?
Well, after decades of state-sponsored violence being used as the primary tool of political control, Abedini argues you have to immediately and permanently break the cycle of retribution.
Or else the new government just inherits the bloody habits of the old one.
Exactly.
But, the reality of a power vacuum is that you never just have one faction holding the scaffolding. You always have rival claimants.
Always.
And this source spends a massive portion of the interview delivering a visceral, intensely scathing critique of another prominent opposition figure.
Yes, the former Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi.
Right. And the animosity directed at Pahlavi in this text goes far beyond simple political disagreement. I mean, it attacks his fundamental character and his fitness to lead.
Oh, it's brutal. The source paints him as a profound opportunist, someone who safely waits in the diaspora for ordinary Iranians to bleed in the streets before stepping up to a microphone to claim leadership.
Yeah, Abedini specifically targets what he views as a complete empathy deficit in Pahlavi.
Yes.
He cites a public instance where Pahlavi allegedly referred to Iranian civilian deaths resulting from military strikes simply as unavoidable casualties of war.
But then in the same breath, Pahlavi allegedly sent deeply heartfelt condolences for American soldiers killed in the region.
Right, and the source uses that contrast to argue Pahlavi views the Iranian people as expendable pawns, utterly disconnected from the nation he purports to represent.
And to anchor this claim of disconnect in historical precedent, Abedini references a very specific piece of intelligence history.
Oh, this part was fascinating.
Yeah, he brings up a book called Countdown to Crisis by investigative journalist Kenneth Timmerman.
Right, and he uses it to show that even Pahlavi's potential foreign backers found him lacking. I found his reliance on Timmerman's book incredibly strategic here. He uses the CIA's own historical assessments as a weapon against Pahlavi.
Exactly. The text focuses on interactions in the 1980s involving William Casey, who was the director of the CIA under Ronald Reagan.
And at the time, the CIA, backed by massive financial support from Saudi Arabia, was actively scouting for an asset to facilitate regime change in Iran.
Right, they were looking at Pahlavi as a potential turnkey solution. But according to Abedini's reading of the text, those meetings were a complete disaster for Pahlavi's credibility. Well, William Casey allegedly concluded that Pahlavi severely lacked the necessary leadership qualities to unite a fractured nation.
Wow.
And more damningly, Casey reportedly felt Pahlavi possessed essentially zero understanding of the actual Iranian street.
So no real connection to the people?
None. He had no ground game, no domestic network, and was basically waiting for foreign intelligence agencies to hand him a country on a silver platter.
Right, so the source argues that if the intelligence agencies that actively wanted to install him realized he wasn't up to the task decades ago, he certainly isn't up to it now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Abedini also points to who Pahlavi allegedly surrounds himself with today to prove this point.
Yes, the inner circle.
Right. He claims Pahlavi has actively purged genuine grassroots dissidents from his camp.
And replace them with who?
Former intelligence officers from his father's regime. He explicitly names figures like Pervez Savedi,
who is a highly controversial and notorious official from the Savak, the Shah's secret police.
Right. So by surrounding himself with figures from the Savak, Abedini argues Pahlavi is signaling a return to the authoritarianism of the past, not a step toward a democratic future.
But wait, that creates a massive analytical contradiction, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, if Abedini views Pahlavi as this disastrous, out-of-touch, historically compromised option who relies on old secret police officials, he still has to account for the reality on the ground.
There's support base.
Exactly. Abedini openly acknowledges in the interview that Pahlavi does have a following.
Yes, he does.
There are people inside Iran participating in protests, chanting Javad Shah, which translates to "Long live the king." You don't spend half an interview attacking a rival if they don't have a legitimate base of support.
No, you don't. And this is exactly where Abedini puts on his psychologist hat. And it's arguably the most intricate part of his analysis.
Okay, lay it out for us.
He doesn't dismiss the chance, but he attributes this monarchist support to something far deeper than genuine political ideology.
Right.
He attributes it to 47 years of severe compounding national trauma. He lists the relentless horrors the population has endured. The mass executions in the 1980s, the bloody, lethal crackdowns on student protests in 1999, the fuel protests in 2019, and the widespread uprisings in 2022.
Let's use a psychological analogy here to explain the mechanism Abedini is describing for our listener.
Yeah, please.
Think of the human brain like a neurological circuit breaker. When an individual, or in this macro case, a whole population suffers from constant, unrelenting trauma and systemic violence, you develop a condition psychologists call learned helplessness.
Right.
The brain gets so overwhelmed by the sheer complexity, danger, and exhaustion of the environment that it seeks the absolute simplest, lowest energy solution to survive.
That makes total sense.
In a political context, building a messy, nuanced, multifactional democracy requires massive cognitive and social energy.
It's exhausting.
Exactly. So handing over your autonomy to a strong father figure or a returning king is the lowest energy solution available. You don't have to build anything, you just have to obey.
That perfectly captures the mechanism behind Abedini's thesis. He argues that a traumatized collective brain, focused entirely on day-to-day survival, struggles to process complex transitional frameworks.
So chanting for a king isn't a political endorsement.
No, it's a trauma response. It's a desperate plea for simplicity in an overwhelmingly complex crisis. And he connects this psychological vulnerability directly to his outrage over a recent political initiative launched by Pahlavi's camp.
Oh, the Transitional Justice Fact-Finding Committee.
Exactly. Because if your entire path to power relies on exploiting a population's historical trauma, then how you handle the official history of that trauma becomes the most important battleground.
Right. And Abedini goes after the members of this committee with everything he has, targeting two specific individuals to prove his point.
Yes. First, he singles out Shirin Ebadi, a Nobel laureate.
The source accuses her of acting as a soft lobbyist with ties to NIAC, the National Iranian American Council, right?
Yeah. Abedini's faction heavily criticizes NIAC, viewing them not as advocates for the Iranian people, but as unofficial lobbyists and apologists for the current regime in Washington.
Wow. But he saves his most explosive allegations for a man named Iraj Abedini, doesn't he?
He does. And to understand the weight of this accusation, you have to understand the context of the 1988 massacres.
Right, where thousands of political prisoners were systematically executed in secret over a period of a few months following a fatwa by the supreme leader.
Yes. It is one of the deepest scars on the Iranian opposition. And Abedini claims that Mizdaghi, while claiming the mantle of a former political prisoner himself, actively collaborated with brutal prison wardens during that era.
He specifically names Asadullah Lajevardi, famously known as the Butcher of Evin prison.
Exactly. And he doesn't stop at historical collaboration. The source accuses Mizdaghi of dedicating his post-prison life to actively whitewashing those 1988 massacres.
Wait, really? How?
He claims Mizdaghi works to minimize the death toll, obscure the chain of command, and protect the true perpetrators.
That is a heavy accusation. So Abedini argues that appointing individuals with this specific baggage to a fact-finding committee is a deliberate, cynical strategy.
Right. The goal, he claims, is to bury the truth under the guise of investigating it.
He actually compares the dark absurdity of this committee to the current Iranian regime being appointed to a United Nations Human Rights panel.
Yes. To this source, it is absolute proof that Pahlavi's coalition has no intention of holding the architects of state violence accountable because they are fundamentally allied with the very people who carried it out.
Man, the factional infighting, the allegations of historical betrayal, the intricate geopolitical maneuvering, it is an incredibly heavy web of information for you to process.
It really is a lot.
But as the interview draws to a close, Abedini pulls back from the immediate political attacks. He shifts away from the intelligence reports and the factional bitterness and leaves the interviewer with a concept that is deeply, universally human.
Yeah, amidst all the discussion of military strikes and trauma, Abedini introduces a linguistic and historical metaphor to frame the entire situation.
What was it again?
He points out that the Chinese word for crisis is composed of two distinct characters, one representing danger or destruction, and the other representing opportunity or rebuilding.
Destruction inextricably linked to rebuilding.
Exactly. He argues that while the current multi-layered crisis in Iran is undeniably full of danger and pain, It is simultaneously the raw material required for rebuilding a nation.
And to ground this philosophical idea in reality, he shares a story about political prisoners in Iran during the absolute darkest days of the 1980s.
These were individuals facing daily torture, isolation, and the very real prospect of execution.
Yet, when Nowruz arrived, the Persian New Year, which symbolizes the arrival